Welcome back, Reg Massive. Welcome to our latest Regcast. Now, today we're talking about BYOD, and you say it says BYOD, beyond the noise. Well, what we thought is that the noise very often, when we start talking about BYOD, we immediately start talking about sort of devices, and this one, and that one, and this one, and that one. So we wanted to refocus the debate and to look a little bit more on the infrastructure that you're building that the devices connect to. So we hope this is going to be helpful. We know it's going to be useful, and we've got some people who are very experienced in that. Who are these people, you ask, in your heads? Well, from HP today, we would like to welcome back to the studio Trevor. Hello, Trevor.
Hello, Tim.
It wasn't too horrible last time you were in.
No, I survived.
I distinctly remember you said you had a good time. You had a surprisingly good time, I think was the exact word. And so there's no surprises for you today. Now, why are you involved in this, Trevor?
Well, I manage a team of technical consultants that support our salespeople in the networking arena, and we're talking to our customers on a regular basis about networking, about wireless infrastructure, and clearly about bring your own device as well. So, I'm here to sort of assist.
I suppose, yeah. Oh, in that case, you can stay. And you had such a good time that you brought your mate along. Hello, Andy.
Hello, Tim.
Welcome to the studio for the first time. It's smaller than it seems, isn't it?
It's very good, yeah.
It's incredible. And so, Andy, same question. Why are you here?
I'm an HPN solution architect, so really working with wireless prospects, and it's really my focus to find mobility solutions for our customers and working with the wider HP to find the best solutions for our customers.
You help put these things together.
Exactly.
You know exactly where the problems are.
It's
good.
It's busy time at the moment.
Well,
yes.
Yeah. I imagine it is. With the state of the wireless networks that I have to deal with in some places, you could really do quite a bit more, please.
Love to.
Get out there and
make the job okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And joining us from our old mates, Freeform Dynamics.
Hello,
Dale.
Tim. How you doing?
Dale, back again.
Back again.
They said another thing. You're a man for all seasons on this sort of stuff, aren't you? You know everything about everything. Do you know anything about this?
Well, I've spoken to a lot of people about it. It's a really interesting area, and there's lots of debates going on. I mean, we're going to try and sort of be pretty focused today and avoid a lot of the noise, as you said earlier on.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I was only making fun of you because I know from, I've seen your slides as well, but I know from what you've been saying that you have been talking to a lot of people practically about how they build this.
We've done some quite serious research. I mean, there's obviously a lot of stuff going on in the IT press and marketing and all kinds of other areas, people evangelising BYOD, big talk of transformation and so on. Actually, though, when it comes down to it, which we'll get into as we go through this, there are some pretty basic things that need to be addressed to take on board some of the things that are happening. It might not be as huge and transformational, at least immediately, as some people claim, but there is some pretty serious stuff going on that needs to be dealt with. So
it means everything won't grind to a halt or fall over, and you won't have the horrible hidden security problems. This is where we're at now. Interface, because we want you to ask questions for this. I did a live chat for the Reg a few weeks ago about BYOD, and it was like being bombarded with questions from all sides. It was like having a conversation, a polite dinner table conversation with 1,500 people at dinner. So we know you've got a lot of questions. Please do send them in. You'll see in the little box above my head, you sort of click the thing to ask the questions. If we don't talk about what you want to know about, and you didn't ask the question, you can't really complain. Now, you can download the slides as well. You can give us your feedback afterwards, please do, and let us know if you want us to talk about this a little bit more or a different thing about this. We've got, we know the people who can talk about this. We've got two of them in the studio. So please do that. Let's get on with it. To start with, now, guys, I said we wouldn't be talking about devices.
But we have to.
We've got devices on the first line. Oops, awkward. But what we're saying with this is devices do put a different sort of load on your network, don't they?
They do, and I think what we need to understand is each of these devices have different profiles about them in terms of their reach and their wireless perspective, getting onto the network, the size of their screen from a usability perspective, and the security elements to it. So you may have more security around the laptop versus the tablet device types.
A big problem is that we don't really know what devices a lot of people have.
Absolutely. Well, the other thing I would say is that it's not just limited to laptops, smartphones and tablets. There's also gaming devices as well.
Yeah.
Some people come in to
You can't go to a company and bring your gaming. You
Well.
can't bring your gaming device to work. Is that what you do at HP? No, but, yeah. But seriously, but
Job's going. That's it, isn't it?
it seems more fun than I thought it was. But yes, but what we're saying is, taking into account all of this, we've got to build the thing that will help them connect to the network.
There's something I'll throw in, which is
Yeah.
I've talked to a lot of people about BYOD, and probably 9 times out of 10 they focus on smartphones and tablets, whereas in fact all the research we've done with the reg readers,
Good point.
4 or 5 studies where we've touched on this topic, the biggest BYOD device is the Windows PC. So, let's not lose sight of the fact that laptops are a really, really important part of this equation. And obviously, given that they're quite hungry from a network point of view, that's good to acknowledge as well.
Uh-huh. So we noticed the smartphones and the tablets because they knew
Yeah.
they didn't have those before. But it's still a
It's
laptop
what productivity
world.
you can get out of those devices as well.
Yeah.
Yes.
I guess if you look at it from a PC perspective, then there's an increased risk of security issues, malware, that sort of thing as well. So
Yeah.
you need to
So
take
it's
that into consideration.
ballgame.
So now the definition of BYOD is pretty broad, but we're focusing on just the bits in black today. Is that right, Dale?
Yeah. One of my hobby horses with BYOD is, you see all these stats published. 90% of organisations are committed to BYOD. 80% are doing, letting their users use devices. 70% are expecting users to pay for their own devices. That was a headline I saw last week. And all this kind of stuff. Actually, people get all kinds of activity totally confused in this space. So just to make sure we're totally focused on the kind of stuff that you're most likely to see out there, there's a form of BYOD which is basically you say to your employees, look, we're not going to give you a company mobile phone anymore. We're going to restrict that to the people that really need them. If you're going to make business calls, use your own phone, and either we'll give you an allowance or you claim back the calls you make on expenses. That's legitimate BYOD. It's got nothing to do
We
with
don't care
data
about that. We don't care about that
applications.
today. Yeah.
At the other end of the spectrum, you've got a whole bunch of noise going on about organisations saying, we're not going to provide you with a device, you have to buy your own device to get your job done. That's what we call authorised substitute devices, to use a horrible phrase. But basically, we're not seeing a huge amount of that. We are seeing it in places, but what we are seeing a fair amount of are the 2 bits in the middle. Perk access, where basically you're just giving people access to the Wi-Fi network at work, so they can hook up their smartphone or their tablet device. There's not necessarily even a huge business benefit to doing that, which is why I've called it perk access. It's a bit like providing good coffee or a subsidised canteen and that kind of stuff. It falls into that general category. Makes people feel good. The third one on that list, authorised companion device, is where you have maybe a sales guy who wants to use an iPad because he feels more comfortable sitting in front of customers with it rather than opening the laptop. There is a business benefit, but it's arguably not one that you would regard as being high enough to actually buy them that kind of device. So they do need access, though, into some network resources if they're going to use a device in that way, and you say, OK, fine, I acknowledge that's worthwhile doing, I'm going to support you properly with that. So the focus for today are basically the 2 bits in the middle, which you're most likely to come across in most organisations.
Yeah. Productivity comes from the mobility piece of this, isn't it? Because most of us have been given laptops by our organisations. But if you've got your own personal phone, to be able to extend that productivity when you're out at a coffee shop meeting a customer or out and about rather than getting a laptop out, it's got to be a
so we did some reg research, actually, and it's worth actually probably saying this, that the only area where we saw a very, very clear productivity gain is where you have people that were kind of semi-mobile. So you do give them a laptop, as you say. They're kind of out and about enough that a mobile device is useful to them, but not enough for you to actually give them a fully funded mobile device for getting to their email and stuff. So those kind of borderline cases, there you do get a definite productivity increase, and people sort of acknowledge that there is a real business benefit there. So that'll probably fall into the third category.
Yeah, when you said semi-mobile, I was thinking they could walk, but not very fast. Does this slide, though, have different network implications? I mean, can you not build a network that's good for all of it?
Well, I think the number one issue here is that a lot of these devices are wireless only. As your organisation, if you look at the reg readers, have your organisations got wireless enabled? Have you got the infrastructure in the wireless to talk about that, and we'll talk about that in a minute anyway. So.
Okay, let's have a look. Now, also, Dale, you pointed out that, from the responses that we've had, then, and as I know, it tends to polarise opinion.
Yeah, I mean, this basically just to acknowledge, so we can put it to one side, the fact that, there are huge debates going on in this space. Their users are claiming that it makes them massively more productive, and then other people are looking at it, a bit more holistically and saying, but you're actually creating quite a chaotic environment because everyone's using different applications and tools.
And you're actually just displacing work from one place to another.
So the net effect is arguable. There's you can read those. At the end of the day, the bottom line, though, is that most users and business people we talk to are very pro BYOD. They see it being a real positive thing. Most IT people see it as a pain, a problem that needs to be dealt with. You can debate that stuff for hours, but we're not going to go there today.
With respect to the reg audience, then a lot of this tends to go on above their pay grade. It's an organisational thing that's already decided, or it's just a process, an organic process that's already happening. Yes. At which point, your only job is really to make sure that it works okay, so that your life is tolerable and the life of the users is reasonable. Yeah,
exactly. And we all know that, whilst in theory execs are responsible for security, in practice, dealing with security comes back to IT.
But they're typically the first ones that want the BYOD to start.
Yeah.
Because they've got the nice devices and they want to bring them in.
Yeah,
so we've seen, in our experience, we've seen quite a lot of that. So
access, exactly. I can drive that. Now let's have a look at your Rubik's Cube here, though, Dale. I like this. I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this. I like your diagram.
All right. Okay. Well,
you got the perspective wrong, but I like. Your diagram.
I know. Yeah. A bit of. Anyway, I'm not a graphic designer. So seriously, there's. I think people talk about BYOD as if it's just one thing, but what I'm trying to do with this is basically say, look, it can translate to all kinds of stuff. We've mentioned some of them already, and there are three main dimensions. One of them is if you go down the left-hand side, the kind of device. So the device is important, as we've said. There's a big difference between a PC and a smartphone. There's what you're doing with that device and particularly what kind of access you need. So if it's voice only, then that's obviously one thing. If you're coming in through published internet access or internet services like web access and through ActiveSync, that's fine. But if you're actually getting into authenticated access into the network, that's another case altogether. So that's the dimension that goes along the bottom. And then there's really the simple thing that, how important is this device? There are some situations where if that device suddenly has a problem, then the user stops functioning. If the device becomes critical to their work. There are other situations where it's just a convenience, and it really doesn't matter that much. And the two extremes there, the bottom left is where someone is making the odd business call on a smartphone and claiming it back on expenses. That's got nothing to do with data or anything, as we said earlier on. That's one extreme of BYOD. The other extreme is where actually they don't have a corporate laptop anymore. They're using their own laptop, but it's absolutely essential to what they're doing, their role. And that's the back right-hand corner there. And there's all combinations of those three dimensions that crop up in the BYOD game. So you've got to be really clear about understanding the kind of patterns of behaviours that you're seeing, bearing those kind of three dimensions.
Well, we could use Dale's diagram to diagnose companies, couldn't we? We could, if someone has some three-dimensional paper, they could shade it in with colour. But I mean, seriously,
decision-making slide.
Yeah, it's a decision-making that you can, by looking at the amount of activity, the proportion of activity that's in it, you can really look at. It helps you to diagnose how much you want to invest, and when we go through in more of the details where you're going to put that investment.
Exactly. Yeah,
absolutely.
That's going to be different for everybody. But more people are moving towards the top back right.
I don't think people have worked out where they want to be perfectly honest. And it does depend on user as well. So you find that, some users naturally migrate to the back right. A lot of users remain towards the front of that cube.
Yeah. Now, before we sort of security, we had the first question in is from Mark here. Why sit at the device layer? Surely BYOD should encourage the uptake of a pro-Jericho approach. Let's take the walls down. That sounds quite radical, doesn't it?
It is quite radical. I think again, the company has to support this decision. And this is why it's really important to plan, bring your own device policies. Mm-hmm. And this is what we're going to come on to in this slide, really, is because you can't just open the doors up. It may be security implications. And different companies have different approaches, and their HR policies may well lie with IT, certainly.
This is the point. A lot of this doesn't come from within IT, does it? No. A lot of it comes
again, we're in danger of going down another route here, which is the whole area of what some marketing people are calling rogue cloud now, which is use of Dropbox and services that you just sign up to. It's kind of related, and it's users taking control of things, but actually that's not the main purpose of today. It is mixed up in the BYOD discussion. Yeah. But there are some people that argue very strongly that you should give users ultimate freedom to use whatever internet services they want and information services. And that obviously, if you're a bank in the city that's highly regulated, you're going to take one view on that. If you're a plumber's merchant sitting on a trading estate in Slough, you might take a totally different view. So,
I think another thing is if you create an intolerant network, then you do increase the incentives for people to try and work their way around.
Well, for you, if you've got a device and you go into the office and you've got an SSID that you can connect to and a security thing, you're going to try it, aren't you? Mm. So, So what we're saying here is that actually what you really need is a proper company security policy to put around that. And
the serious point here is balance, and there's a sort of philosophical thing that's probably worth saying, which is that if, kind of picking up on what you just said, Tim, if you do constrain people too much, they'll work around what's in place. So if they absolutely cannot get to anything on the network from their mobile device, then they will use Dropbox to transfer the information around. Whereas if you give them access into, convenient access, point-and-click access into a SharePoint system, for example, then that's a different matter. They've got less motivation to go elsewhere.
Yeah. Now let's have a look at the dimensions of your security policy here, guys. So you've picked some out for us here, and the implications that's going to have for what you build.
So I think it's really important that the customer or the company understands what they want to achieve within their requirements. So, like we're saying, is guest access good enough? First of all, many people have got wrapped up in the BYOD theme from the last year, thinking that everything around internet access is BYOD because they've got a smartphone, they just want to get on and get some information off the network because they've got a proxy in the way and it blocks certain websites or whatever. So, what we can do here is look at the role of the user, whether they're a contractor or a public user, guest, completely different to an organisation or a trusted employee, and then build access policies inside our network, allow them on the network according to those policies. And if unfortunately devices do represent certain risks in certain areas, so we have to run potentially a further check and making sure those devices are properly covered with antivirus software. And that's really where we can look at these policies and understand from different locations who's allowed to do what, where and where. It might be a sensitive location where wireless is absolutely not going to be allowed at all. Mm-hmm. So that might be a question mark as well.
So I mean, it's sort of implicit in what you're saying that for some locations, different times, then guest access is fine. Just
absolutely.
So I think the other point of that is because there's a lot of cloud, a lot of services that we're using as organisations that are now in the cloud. So a good example is your active sync with email. Once upon a time you had to connect into your networks to be able to access your email. That's not the case anymore. Mm-hmm. At HP we use Salesforce.com as our CRM system. We don't need to be on the intranet to access that anymore. Whereas, on the intranet there might be specific business applications that you do need to have access to. Their SharePoint's a good example. We use that internally in HP extensively, and we need to be connected to the HP network intranet to be able to access that. So, I think you need to look at the sorts of applications, information the individual needs to have access to.
OK, so my other question is then, how granular do you get about this in recognising different types of people with different needs in the same location?
I think that, again, you've got to look at keeping it as simple as possible. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, you're going to be bombarded with your IT guys going to have more work than they had before. Yeah. If not. So keeping it simple with automated policies, making sure that if you're going to take devices on, you can do things like fingerprinting devices in the background, so devices are silently categorised based upon their user type of device, and we can look at the MAC of the device and categorise the vendors, the OS types, and so we can very easily quarantine devices or actually allow devices through based on these policies. So realistically, we can make those decisions and not really affect the...
Yeah, so the question that sort of comes in, there's sort of quite a lot on this. It does take us a little bit back to the device things, but how do you then, can you categorise the devices that you're saying, these are good, these not so good,
yes,
these really
absolutely.
don't work?
So on the slide, we're showing the main areas that we'd be looking at when we do the device fingerprinting, right? And fingerprinting is not what's on the end of finger, by the way. It's actually the digital fingerprint of the device. But the location. So, for example, we'll use an example in a little while of a university, and the access that you might want in a classroom or a lecture theatre compared to a refectory or a coffee area is maybe different. So you can look at that, the role, compared to a student compared to a teacher, for example, or a lecturer. And then clearly the different types of devices, different operating systems, what type of antivirus software they're running. You can look at all of those and build an automated policy around that.
Absolutely. And this is our starting point, creating some sort of typology of where people are going to be, what they're going to need to be doing, and what they're doing it with. Yeah. And you can quickly become too complicated, can't you, Dan?
You can. But the trick is, we talk about role, but actually in practice, you're looking for patterns. And normally when we go through this with people, you end up with about usually between 4 and 8 sort of categories of people. Yep. You might call them roles, but actually in one category you might put middle managers and senior sales guys and consultants, for instance, because they all roughly have the same access patterns. Yep. They're all on the road, they're all handling the same kind of sensitivity of data and so on. They're all moving around in similar ways. So you're looking for patterns that are reproducible, and normally, very rarely if you go beyond about 6 or 7 of those. 8, I think, is the most that I've seen. And then for each of those, you're not talking about an infinite number of locations. You're basically talking about things like, are they in a secure location? And that will map on to certain physical locations, obviously, but the policy relates to if they're in a secure location or if they're in an insecure location. So, a good example might be if it's a medic in a hospital, if they're within the grounds of the hospital, then they can access patient information. Yes. If they're using the same device from a coffee shop, they can't. It's a very, very simple sort of principle. But you usually don't end up, in my experience, with lots of too many variants.
Is that true? Is that true for you guys in your experience?
Yes, and it's a very apt thing, and you can do a lot of that within wireless policies and things. So if you're accessing from a certain part of the network, the network device won't be allowed on the network, or it will be known about, so you know where you're coming in from.
Okay.
So I think logically first, and then translate that into sort of physical policies. If that makes sense.
But that sounds to me like this is not technically too huge a step to make, as long as you're organised about your categorisation of what needs to be done. Yeah. But there are implications for the network.
If you don't plan this out, then you will get in a bit of a pickle. That's at the end of it, really. So when we look at the network, how it used to look, we've got a fixed wired medium to our users. We know that 24 or 48 users will be on a switch. They've all got one cable each. If we think about just adding the wireless onto the network, first of all, that's making sure that we've got adequate wireless coverage to drive this new philosophy. So we spoke to a couple of customers, and we said, do you have a wireless policy already in place? No, we don't really, because this is a bank we're talking about here. Oh, okay, so we're not really talking about BYOD, you're talking about guest access then, aren't you? So let's get this right. So if you do invest into a BYOD, are you going to open up and have the right switches in place? Will you have the Wi-Fi in place? Will that Wi-Fi switch infrastructure be secure, so if I get frustrated, I don't come along and plug another access point in and have my own private Wi-Fi, because I think that's the way to go about it. And when you look at that as well, we've got to say, well, AP devices are now getting very, very powerful. The new standards are out there with 802.11 AC just around the corner, 1 gig AP throughput, connectivity. So all of a sudden, that switch was no longer supporting 24p, but it could be supporting 10 times or even more than that. That switch then has to become very important in the network. It's a different perspective. It may need multiple power supplies because it's become supporting a lot more users. It was an edge switch before, and now it's an edge switch with a lot more value. So if you don't plan out and you haven't got the infrastructure in place, you could be looking at bigger budgets than you thought you had. So BYOD does need to be planned. It needs to be thought out where you want it, and then obviously you can relate to that back to the core. So everything gets exponentially larger.
So when you go and you're visiting locations who are making this journey, is this something that you find is often overlooked, the implications of just scaling up your infrastructure?
In some companies, yes. There's been the case we found that they've not really thought about, and they say, actually, well, we'll sit back down again and think about this a bit more detail and where we want Wi-Fi, in which office we want that in, because we haven't really given it a proper thought. We say, well, no, where do you want this connectivity from? So we ask them questions, and it does make them think a bit more about what their plans are to do. So it's important to do that.
I was presenting alongside someone who'd actually put a BYOD policy in place a few months ago, and someone asked, what's the biggest problem that you encountered? And they said, well, we just moved too quickly. We just let all these devices onto the network, and we actually had to then retract our BYOD policy and restrict it to a bunch of people. And the problems we had in terms of disgruntled employees when we did that, because you're moving backwards.
Take it away.
If you just said we're going to do it, but hang on for 3 months whilst we actually put the right kind of infrastructure in place, that's one thing. But doing it and then having to unwind, that's awful. And the poor guy was that was.
I guess also you look at the devices themselves are quite powerful, and the applications they run can be bandwidth intensive. I
was going to say, does it change the nature of the network traffic?
Yeah, clearly. You think things like Facebook, or if someone emails a YouTube video around, and then all of a sudden you've got 10 people looking at a YouTube video, and the implications are quite significant.
Are you saying this is a good or a bad thing?
Well, I guess another good example might be sports. If someone's watching the cricket or something, or we've got the 100-metre race in the Olympics or something, and everybody's watching it on their devices from work, for example. That's not an unusual thing, perhaps, to happen. And
it's good to know in an Ashes summer that we're doing our bit for the cricket watchers of the corporate world.
But clearly, the network infrastructure can have a massive impact. Just the video portion of that. Yeah.
But you just leave an iPhone sitting there that's just roamed onto the Wi-Fi network, and now it's doing all of its background stuff.
Yes,
That is a good point. When if someone's got several devices and they're just automatically connecting to the network because you've accepted them onto the network, and all the time they're connecting and polling, then again you can run into problems, can't you? Where suddenly during the working day the entire Wi-Fi network's frozen up for the people who are doing essential work. It's frozen up because of things that people aren't even consciously doing.
Yeah. Yes. So it's really important to have policies in place, and looking at the bandwidth. If you start to get down that route, you're looking at your types of network infrastructure, and whether you can apply policies, ACLs, onto the network to control the data flows and any individual programs on the network.
Question for you: how much can you predict or model the traffic from different types of devices in your experience?
Yeah, that's interesting.
It is. I think that's the tricky thing, really. I think what you need to know is what your network currently looks like, first of all, when you embark on this journey. So, if you've got a management system in place that can look at the traffic already, have a look at the traffic, what your flows are, what capacity you've currently got on the network, to know if you've got capacity for further change as well. And then look at potentially you're running some sort of proof of concept, potentially, and then understanding, if you do start to do this, what it's looking like. So choose a group of users that you think, rather than embarking on a company-wide policy, may want to have a look at on a more provable scale. So,
we would always recommend running a pilot for a BYOD for sure, allowing customers to come on, or users to come on.
Yeah.
So let's have a look. So we had a question from Dan. He says, how far behind is the public sector in this? I think Dan might potentially work for a public sector organisation, but sure, in lots of the public sector there are lots of the policies are quite intensive. One part of the public sector here that you're going to focus on, which is right at the front of this, education.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, not all public sector, I know, because I've presented some of these things at conferences and things like that, and normally someone sticks their hand up and says, I work for the government, we can't do this. There will be restrictions in different parts of the public sector for this, won't there?
Well, that's a policy to start with, isn't it? If the policy is we're not going to have Wi-Fi in a building, then
At least you know your policy.
You know your policy, don't you?
Yeah. So we see local governments following quite strict guidelines. They'll tend to follow things along the lines of what we call Manual Y, which are governance guidelines about the security of sensitive data. So they have to be compliant in a lot of areas. So their Wi-Fi has to be top-notch, has to be secure, and has to be separated from a sort of firewall and security perspective, and making sure that networks are discreetly used correctly. So in that response, we do see demands from. We have got councils out there that have employed it, and they've gone about it to make sure they can use iPads in a certain discreet way on certain networks.
If they solve the problem well, then there's a lot to be learned from that as well.
Yeah.
That maybe some companies that could have a more laissez-faire security policy, but that wouldn't benefit them. They could maybe learn some things from the way that that's implemented.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Now let's have a look at... But we went down a side road there. Let's have a look at education. So what we're saying here is that universities and schools and things like that, they're pretty good at BYOD.
Well, that's what they're sort of leading this quite often, because they've got a modern, well, I suppose a young customer base effectively, and they've got thousands of them. Some of the universities that we've been dealing with, they're tens of thousands of students and thousands of staff. Mm-hmm. So, and those students are at the beginning of the digital age, and they want to be able to connect when
they're quite bandwidth intensive.
Yeah. A good example is that you go away on the Christmas holidays, they get all their new devices for Christmas, come back in January, and the first thing they want to do when they get back to university or school or whatever is, I want to connect up, and away you go. So that first day back is quite interesting for the IT staff.
So what's the secret? What do they do?
So you have to have a good Wi-Fi network in place. There's not two ways about this.
It's not a very good secret.
it's a true statement. People don't tend to really think about what the client devices can do. They just assume, if it's 82.11n, it's just going to work. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the older 82.11n was all based around a 2.4 standard of frequency, and now we're moving to 5 gigahertz with new standards. Mm-hmm. It's important that the Wi-Fi environment encompasses both frequencies and are able to support all types of wireless devices. So
what's the difference?
2.4 gigahertz is really the old 82.11g type network, and the other network was the 82.11a network that we're known about. But again, it's really about what's in that client device, and it will choose the radio it will go on to. The 2.4 network is very, very busy. Mm-hmm. So if we look at, if we were to look around the city, there's hundreds and hundreds of networks. There's less networks in the 5 gigahertz band. There's more capacity there, more channels. So, in fact, it makes sense to try and use that, which is where it's going to go to. It'll probably end up with those channels being used, but at the end of the day, the Wi-Fi network is key to this, to making it secure and very usable, but it's got to be reliable. You're not going to want to use it if you can't get if you're going to get poor connection, no matter what we're looking at here. If the physical network is not working well, and it's not good coverage, and the density of wireless is there to support lots and lots of users, we're going to fail with this one, and we're going to get disgruntled.
So seriously, basically, the big lesson is you need to provision a lot about more than you're thinking at the moment. Take what you're thinking at the moment and double it or something.
Well, but to reinforce what you just said, you need to have a modern infrastructure as well. So there's no point in just rolling out more 2.4 gigahertz access points in a hall's residence, because they'll just clash with each other and they'll all mangle each other's.
Right, so when you get a certain density of them, then they tend to...
The channels will overlap. There's a limited amount of channels in 2.4, so you're really restricted in the actual bandwidth of the over-the-air, what you've got.
Now that's...
So why the move is towards the new standards of 82.11ac in the 5 gigahertz band, which is really where we're seeing a lot of interest.
We see extremes, obviously, in the education side of things, because of the number of students, and then when they go between classrooms, they might log out and log back in again, so you get a lot of change within the organisations. And we put down diversity of location, and they've got campuses with lots of different buildings, but there's also different densities. In a classroom, very different density to a refectory, for example. So, and then there's role-based as well. We talked about difference between students and lecturers, but even from a student perspective, some of them set up within their Active Directories. Students have access to different materials depending on the course that they're doing as well. So that can all be included in the policies.
That's one of the interesting things I find about this. There's a lot of the conversations that we have around BYOD is what you let on the network, what don't you let onto the network. We've already had it this morning. I hang around universities. That was meant to sound different. So just pretend that never happened. I have spent some time studying recently, and one of the things that interests me is when you go to a university network, no one fusses about what your device is. No. You never hear anything about this is your list of devices.
Yes.
Now, do they then take a hit on security because of that?
They know how to track users, and I think they've got the infrastructure in place in the bigger picture to already police. So they've got proxies, internet proxies out there to filter some of the traffic from the internet side of things. Mm-hmm. Many universities now have got a log-on that is advised when the people join the university. They'll have an instruction on how to set their Wi-Fi up. So it's a very clear instruction, and they'll make that instruction so that's a secure log-on to the network. And I think that there is there's a guideline already put by the university in your joining instructions on how you're to approach university life and university infrastructure and wireless and what's available. So there is a guideline there already.
Yeah.
So and is it secure? Yeah, because they've got certain already networks in place and the policies in place to do it. So we can apply that knowledge really to the enterprise without a doubt.
And this is pretty mature, actually, a lot of this university stuff, because remember, for at least 6-7 years now, it's been pretty normal for students to turn up with their own laptops, and those laptops be actually pretty essential to doing coursework and stuff. So it's actually not been an option. So these guys have been through various iterations of...
So one of the universities we're working with at the moment does distinguish between devices. What they're saying is if a student has got a laptop or a MacBook, for example, then they will be allowed access to the course materials and intranet access, but that has to go. Those specific users have to go through a virus check first. So that's the idea is as they connect to the network, virus check, and it's either if their viruses scanning is fine, then they go onto the intranet. If they're not, they go into quarantine. Right? Any other devices, it's effectively guest access, so they're allowed access to the internet.
Right. So you go through your check, and basically, then you're approved. Once you're approved, then you get the other people who just want to show up unapproved. No.
So I think the other really important part about this is the number of students, because manually you can do that provisioning of the network, okay? But if you imagine tens of thousands of students, that just doesn't become practical at all. So putting something automated in place is absolutely critical.
And that's relevant to businesses out there, because at the moment people have been able to get away with restricting access to, what I would call the VIP guys, the guys who can afford the iPads and stuff. But you can't maintain that selective access for that long. So you're going to be in the same position as universities, ultimately, I would guess, in most situations.
Let's just have a look at it. So the network that our audience might have today, so what's missing? That's my question. What's missing?
What's missing? They may have the automated part missing. They may have disparate management networks. So the network they've got a wired network, and they've got some wireless there. It's not really managed together as the same entity. So first of all, they can't really see the visibility of the network necessarily. But really, the other part of it is the security aspect and the onboarding types of servers and automation that you want to put in the background. The security type elements. There's the typical radius type services that universities have already got in place anyway. So they've got the security in place. So these are sort of security elements that you're going to have to beef up and maybe automate a bit more.
So I'm going to put you on the spot a bit here, and if there's a sort of a checklist, if there's some 3 or 4 things that they should ask themselves, do I have this? If the answer's no, then I need to do something sharpish about it. What are the big no's? What are the big no's? What's the problem? What are the things that if they look at their network, they know that it's not going to be ready for BYOD?
I think if they've got older switches, 10100 switches, old wireless, and really a server infrastructure that's not really linked to being managed as one element, really, and so they can see what's going on from a security perspective. They really haven't got the server security in place then to take on these automated services, and they need to think about that.
Yeah. Anything you'd add, Dale?
No, it's the old problem of if it's disjointed, as you've said, you don't have visibility, you can't control and manage it.
Yeah. Do you see this quite a lot then?
Okay.
Do you see this a lot, Dale, in the people that you talk to as well?
Yeah, certainly the sort of fragmented networks and management tools is a big problem that comes through a lot.
Yeah.
And older kit. I mean, a lot of people know they're sitting on old kit and they're deferring. Yeah. Sweating the assets, is that a phrase?
It's what we used to use a couple of years ago. We don't.
It was a good thing, wasn't it?
We don't talk about that. Yeah, that's exactly when it seemed like it was a positive thing to do. The trouble is, some of those sweaty assets now aren't really.
Yeah, they're starting to melt.
Aren't really.
So simply, I guess some simple things like that, having PoE on your switches, being able to power access points, and to get the coverage that you need for this is, if you haven't got those switches, then you've got to do something about it if you're going to make this work correctly.
Yeah, but in a world where fewer and fewer devices are going to come with an Ethernet port, it's quite interesting, isn't it? That in itself is, when you go through your next round of laptop replacements, people want the thin, light devices, wireless only.
Yes. So this is this is what you should be having, and so we've got instead of all that sort of horrible broken stuff with the cross in, we have nice things now. On the left, Unified BYOD Essentials. What does this mean?
It's really the collection of basic services that you need to really bring those users on board the network. So, onboarding is the way how they join the network. The provisioning part, which we'll look in a bit more detail, is how you're going to take them on and through the policies. And then once they're on the network, what are we going to do? How are we going to monitor them? It's not just about monitoring for security. It's about monitoring the quality of the network, which is why the unified wireless network all comes together, because we see switches are up, we can see the access points are working, we can see the sort of user counts, we can get a real visibility from we've got a single management platform that will allow that to happen. And you can actually see the types of traffic on those devices, the top talkers, and really the types of users that are coming onto the network, and unfortunately the device types, you can see who's really using what, where and when of the network.
So it's a question from James here. It's a little bit related, but not very, but I thought I'd just ask it. He's asking about the security products that you put in place for BYOD, and he's being sort of quite specific. What is the best to do? What do you put in place as a security product? Do you need to start looking again at the security that you're putting in place?
So in our solutions, we're looking at the typical types of an authorization server. Potentially another part is what we call admission defense checking. So we're looking at further posture checking of virus checking, antivirus, making sure devices are absolutely up to scratch with their policies, and doing monitoring of those devices as well. We can run further checks as well, and we can look at blocking a device if it's got banned software on it, for example. So it's really a basic building block. With this platform, you can add in different modules, so you can look at the basics and just look at the sort of the radius type security logon with extra features such as the fingerprinting, so we can look at categorising devices just purely on a simple authentication mechanism.
Mm-hmm. But once you start to unify the network and you start to sort of put the process together here in a more coherent way, then it makes easier the selection of what you put in place.
You need the tools in place to do that.
Effectively, what we're doing from a security perspective is we're dropping the user into the relevant VLAN. At the end of the day, you drop them into the VLAN that allows you access to the intranet, or you drop them into a VLAN that just allows them internet access. That's what it comes down to. But it's that bit of policy checking that happens before.
So you work out who goes into what,
So there's another discussion above the network, further up the stack, which is around applications and blacklisting, whitelisting, all that kind of those kind of techniques. That takes you into the realms of mobile device management. There's a whole load of there's probably about 50, 60 vendors out there with various tools.
You've got 3 or 4 more hours today, guys. You can deal with that one as well.
I think a lot of people are sort of going through the process of saying, well, do we want to put something separate in place for mobile devices? And as the lines are blurring, tablets are becoming more powerful, PCs are looking more like tablets, and operating systems are sort of migrating up and down the spectrum. I think people are revisiting that whole thing in terms of how we should be managing that. So I think the first generation of MDM solutions are very much focused on your classic mobile operating systems, but they don't really help you deal with what you might sort of think of as the desktop class machines, the laptops.
Yes.
And so, as we said earlier, you want everything as joined up as possible from a policy management point of view.
Yes.
So that's a bit of maybe that's a subject for another Regcast at some point, because that's a discussion in its own.
But the basic point is, if you've got your desktops and your laptops being their security policy comes from this type of management, and then you've got everything else coming from that type of management, then you get the beginnings of fragmentation.
Given the choice, you would focus here first, I would argue, because this is your kind of first line of defence in terms of what's let onto the network and what it can do once it's there.
So now we were talking about about what has to be automated here. Basically, it's this process, isn't it?
Yeah, these are all the questions that you're going to be really asking from an admin perspective to the user perspective.
So if this is a real admin, I mean, this is the shape of a person, but if this is a real admin, that's going to be a very busy admin, isn't it?
And this is the questions. You could use this slide really to actually drive your policy. When you start to think about this is a good way to think about this. But this is what we do in terms of in our security on board unified essentials. Is actually we're going to be looking at this and saying, are we going to be putting all these things into place, or are we just going to keep it very simple? Mm-hmm. So it's really how detailed do you want to do this, and how do you want to look at devices in such a way that it's will allow them on the network. So you can look at the device types, and then once they're on the network, are they keeping up to date and making the network safe?
So the question is, how detailed do you want to be about this? What is the answer to that?
It's an open-ended question, depending on the company. Really, again, and it just goes back to how we started, the different company types and what they really want from it, and that's why the company has to ask themselves: do we need to put all this in place? Is this a burden for us, or is it a simple internet access again? That's exactly that question.
I knew that was going to be the answer, even as I asked the question.
A related question, which is probably one that's more easily addressable, is whatever level of complexity of policy you end up with. Having an administrator run through this as a conversation with each user is obviously not particularly scalable. So how do you scale it? How do you automate it? And how do you actually apply that kind of dialogue in an automated way across hundreds or even thousands or tens of thousands of users? So.
When you categorise your users, having the sort of typical answers.
In many ways, you want a lot of that stuff to be going on behind the scenes, don't you?
Yes,
absolutely. Well, going back to the education, you talk about tens of thousands of students. That's just impossible to do manually, isn't it?
Yes.
Impossible to organise them to do anything. I'm only kidding. Students watch.
And I guess that's one of the main objectives when you guys go into accounts, and you're trying to help them automate this kind of level of
well, that's where the value of the BYOD essentials that we're promoting here really is the value of the automation is making this simple and scalable. Really.
Well, should we look at that sort of process then? Because you divided it into onboarding and provisioning and monitoring. Yeah, so those three sections. So we look at this in a little bit more detail. Onboarding.
That's the joining to the network.
Yeah.
Really. So you see a wireless service in the air, you connect to it. You know that's the right service to connect to, and you connect to it. And then the question is, how do you join it? Do you have to put a key in? Do you have to put more on your laptop in terms of the username and password? Is it a simple web page? Or is there more behind the scenes, or is there a client, a piece of software that we want to hook onto the PC as well? So really, that's the part of it, really. And again, for different environments, we have different approaches to onboarding. And we have a secure web access for universities potentially, but they also use another feature called things like EduRoam, which is an 82.1x. So it's a full secure username and password, and it's not a web logon. So they do have different elements of that. But there is a way that the student has to go through in configuring their laptop within their Windows profile, and it's probably about a 5-6 step process to do that, and they may have a problem doing that. So they need to make sure that information is there to join the network securely in the first place. You can look at other ways of downloading a client that may be a dissolvable client as well. So there's various ways, but onboarding is really how will I join the network.
But is it true to say that there is no one technique that you're going to apply to everyone in every circumstance? You're going to want to mix and match them?
You will do, yes. Yeah, there is no one size
But,
fits
but
all.
all the techniques have really been done already, so you can copy what other people have done.
Yeah.
Yes.
Sorry,
So the onboarding includes the fingerprinting and analysis. Is that correct as well, Andy? You're
exactly.
gathering the information.
You're gathering
about
information in the
device.
background as well. So once you go to the next step, which is the provisioning, that really is. We've got the information now. We can apply that policy. You came in on this SSID. You came in at a certain time of day. Will you be allowed? You came in with this particular device, and we're going to put you in this particular network. And if it's this particular device that doesn't have a really very good track record, or it's a device that's more open to malware, should we say, and it's more likely.
You're thinking of in particular.
So if it's the device that's more likely to have a virus on it, potentially, we would want to maybe run a further check on that. Yeah.
I mean, it's sort of. Do we have to be specific with people and upfront with them? Is it a good thing to say, OK, we dropped you into this bit because you're this, or do people not really need to know?
I don't think people really need to know.
Mm-hmm.
No,
Unless if they're going to quarantine, then
if you're not giving them very much because of a problem,
We've given you just basic access, and you're going to stay there until you
fix it.
And some systems will actually inform users when they join the network what they're actually signing up to do. It's a bit like guest access, but a bit more terms and conditions around it. So when you sign into guest access, it's saying you agree to terms and conditions.
Yeah.
And if you don't adhere to our terms and conditions, you will be blocked from the network.
Mm-hmm. So you can do that for people who are connecting.
It's a similar policy.
Things, so you can do everything except...
Our employee policy states X, Y, Z, or something like that, yes.
Yeah. OK. And on the monitoring section...
So really, once you're on the network, first of all, monitor that client. If you've got an embedded client device with a piece of software on it, so you can carefully monitor that device. You can look at that device from a usability perspective in your management system, so you can see the sort of traffic they're doing. You look at perhaps even look at the apps that they're running. If they've got a particularly busy device that's causing a problem that you've located down to a particular access point or something like that, you might need to kick them off the network. Again, you can use those analytics and reporting, all that sort of good stuff to work out what's going on. So once on the network, you've got good monitoring tools to understand what your wireless users are doing. And
at this stage, I guess, whilst that behaviour is changing fairly rapidly, monitoring is more essential than ever.
Yeah, I think, and also, if you can come back to your senior team and say, well, actually, our wireless has been required here.
Yeah.
It's been a good business decision. We've invested wisely because we can see that it's being used this way or that way. Mm-hmm. And then if you've got some feel for it, because wireless, you can't see what's going on and you don't know what people are doing unless you actually have a tool that actually will show you what's going on.
In your experience, do you tend to get surprises? I mean, like, you put it in place and suddenly you find, oh gosh, we never knew that there was this much from there.
We've had some security organisations actually be surprised when they've put it on how many hidden devices are actually working.
It's a good incentive to put it on, isn't it?
So all of a sudden they realise they've now got visibility of all the other unknown wireless devices out there they didn't realise, and they thought they were running a very secure setup there. Exactly.
Security
it opens their eyes when they see his management system.
So, Tim, I feel I must say that the converged management tool from HP is called Intelligent Management Centre, and you can download a free 60-day trial from our website.
Well, if you can download it for free, then we'll let you say that. No, so what you really are saying on this is one of the things I know. I'm going to give you the chance on this sort of things. You've been very patient with us. is to be able to say, because you've put this together in one, basically in one coherent design, that it makes it a little bit easier to navigate these joins between between activities.
Yeah, can I just chip in and say that just on the note of not knowing what you don't know, I get involved in a lot of conversations with people who are asking lots of questions. I mean, I don't know the answer usually, but it's clear that there are a lot of people out there just trying to figure out how to go about doing this kind of stuff. And then I go and I have briefings with HP and some other players in this space, and it's clear that you guys are doing this day in, day out. You know all the questions and you know all the answers, and you have the tools to actually bring to bear on it. So I think it really is worth just sort of tapping into that kind of expert. I mean, you mentioned you've got a pre-sales team that does a whole load of You know,
We're out there talking to customers every day about this stuff.
Exactly.
What's the downloadable again?
It's Intelligent Management Centre.
Yeah.
It's the tool.
And with Intelligent Management, and so Intelligent Management Centre is basically the software that you would require for the monitoring and the management.
So HP's approach is to have a single pane of glass for managing the complete wired and wireless infrastructure, whether that's from data centre right down to edge and wireless, etc. All the workflow modules required for BYOD are also not included there, part of the software suite. HP's approach is to put all of the management in that. So, for example, all the software-defined networks, which we spoke about last time, all the management of the software-defined network side of things is moving into Intelligent Management Centre as well. So, effectively, it's a framework tool, and you plug in relevant modules to do what you want to do with it.
2 months to play around with it. And then see if you can get rid of it. This does fit into a wider conversation, as we say, about the future of mobility. We slice off BYOD because we think about it from a device point of view. Yeah. But actually, what really comes down to is the changing nature of work.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, someone's been asking, are we going to deal with the HR questions about this? Well, we can't really, can we? Because there's just so many of them. But we get a flavour of exactly this comes into an expectation of how people will work in the future and what we give them the ability to do.
Yeah, and an element of trust as well in the organisation with the employees.
Mm-hmm. This goes well beyond network infrastructure. But the idea is if HR is saying you can work in this way, it then becomes the IT department's job to let people work in that way and do as much as you can.
What you will find is, if you want to look at the HR side of things, there's a load of stuff out there now. If you just go and Google BYOD policy, you'll find stuff on various government websites. Some of the US stuff is actually quite interesting. But also, most of the big vendors have policies, template policies, if you like. So, a lot of it is because you can look at these things and you can think, wave your arms around and say, there's just so much to think about, where do I start? Well, actually, there are a lot of people who've already thought about it and have already implemented policies. So use what they've done as a starting point and then just tailor it for what you need. Yeah. So there's loads out there. Just Google it, that you'll find. And
to be fair, we make a lot of the differences, but there is a huge overlap between there are basic things that everyone's going to have to do.
One of the biggest tips one of the most valuable tips I heard someone come up with when I was talking to them was, at the very minimum, whatever policies you come up with in HR terms, make people re-sign them on a regular basis, whether it's every 6 months or every year or whatever. Yes. Don't just do it when they join.
People hate that, but it's as if
they do, yeah. But just a quick reminder. And the flip side of that is there's an incentive then to keep it simple and manageable and understandable. Don't ask people to do too many things. Put too many constraints.
Now, here's some of your advice, Dale, to wrap us up in our last few minutes.
Yeah, so we find that most people we talk to, and the reg readers kind of agree with this, are seeing a demand for BYOD at some level. Quite often it's very restricted to certain types of users in the first instance, but then there's the broader discussion that we've been having that ultimately this is probably going to become a normal practice in most organisations, and you're going to need to support it on a broader basis. So really what you want to get to is get to that bottom piece, which is creating a sustainable environment, which is all the wireless stuff we've been talking about, the policy stuff, HR and everything else. But actually, it's hard to do that when you've got some usually quite senior people banging on your door saying, connect up my iPad, let me do this, let me do that. So spend a bit of time just understanding your users. We talked earlier on about categorising them. The noisy ones are easy to spot. The highly paid and politically influential ones are easy to spot as well. Focus on those. If you need to put something temporary in place just to manage the situation, do that. Buy yourself some breathing space, because it's really worth spending the time going through proper pilots and planning and everything else to get to that bottom layer. So all that slide is about is just saying buy yourself a bit of space. Don't feel as if you need to solve the whole problem overnight. You don't.
So that's reasonable. And you've got some more detailed advice here. You can get this. Remember, you can download the slides so you can read the little small.
Yeah, just very quickly to run through those. Think and plan holistically. Just turn the telescope around. Rather than thinking, I've got all these personal devices, think about end-user computing and ways of working and so on. Think sort of network infrastructure out rather than device in. And it's amazing how that changes your view of the world. And that brings in things like, VDI and, other delivery mechanisms, as well as the BYOD and mobility. listen but don't pander. I mean, there's an awful lot of people asking for an awful lot of things, and they'll give you the wackiest justifications for why they need to do what they're asking for. A lot of the time it really isn't necessary, and it is legitimate to say no to people if you've got the right kind of reason for doing so. Be flexible but safe. And this is the idea of just basically, if you put too many constraints on people, they'll find other ways of doing what they want to do. And a general rule of thumb is have as much protection, control, capacity, whatever aspects that you need in your infrastructure as possible, and leave as much leeway at the edges as you possibly can. So a hardcore and flexible edges.
Hardcore and flexible. That's how I always think of you, actually.
Yeah, exactly. And employ just enough management. Same principle, really, which is if you overmanage... I've seen a backlash. People put BYOD programs in place, but then been very overbearing in terms of loading stuff on their personal devices. And you might as well not bother if you're going to do that, because people just won't... they'll just
create a lot of work for yourself.
They'll bug out of the program and they'll do their own stuff anyway. So, getting that right balance. It's all about balance.
Okay, well it's basically our hour. I just, as a sign off for you guys, I'm going to give you a couple more questions that we just heard. The first one is, what do you think of connecting into networks using 3G instead of Wi-Fi?
3G is a bit slower, but it's a useful medium.
To do it, it's just a way of connecting.
There's another way of doing it.
Doesn't
I use
change
it.
the things around sort of like the policy or anything like that we're talking about.
I think you're coming in from the outside, so you're coming in via firewalls and in slightly different ways of working there. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mark points out that on your thing, on the diagram, it's had Wi-Fi access points supporting 10 connections. Are you saying you're recommending 10?
No, that's just a very easy rule of maths on that particular slide, so people can easily understand that we can get up much larger numbers on them, but it's all about, again, expectations, and we don't put lots and lots of wireless clients on an access point unnecessarily if they want a good performance.
So the last one on this is, Trevor, does the debate, Mark says, you started us off with the first question, does this entire debate need to start at the infrastructure level?
I think it needs to start at the policy. You need to come up with, the company needs to have a policy, and then the infrastructure supports the policy.
Yes.
Yeah, I agree. The infrastructure piece is going to cost you money. Therefore, it becomes a business discussion at some point. Therefore, you've got to have the policy level. Who wants to do what and why?
I think what we're saying is two things about this. You have come up with a policy around BYOD. You need to work out what the security policy that drives, and you need to work and make sure that you've got the right network infrastructure. I think they're the two things that we're saying.
He does point out that Jericho refers to be fair to him, the Open Group proposal of deperimeterization, moving away from infrastructure to employing an entirely application-based approach to security, which he says that's easier for BYOD. Do you agree, guys? I mean, HP's open.
Oh, yeah.
You think?
Well, I mean, the reality is that a lot of application infrastructure just aren't up to it at the moment. So pragmatics says it's a nice thing to aim for, and we,
Okay, one for another day.
Yeah.
So yeah, sorry I didn't know about that, Mark. My bad, really. Okay, guys, thank you very much. That's all we got time for. I've run a little bit over because I wanted to get the questions in. Sorry. And thank you for Trevor and Andy for all your and Dale as ever. Good advice. And so, if you've got any comments, fill in the thing that says whether you enjoyed it or not. With the answer, yes, you did. And please join us again for our next Regcast. We've got a few more coming up in the future. Keep a lookout for those. And I've been Tim Phillips. So, from the Reg, goodbye.